The first call came at 2:17 a.m., shattering the silence of my one-bedroom apartment in rural Ohio. Sheriff Dana Whitlock said, "Evan, someone sent you something. You need to see it." I sat up, heart pounding, feeling that old fear crawl back. The laptop on my desk blinked with a single unread email, subject line, "Blueprints to Own the Mind." My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were scanned diagrams, metal bands, electrodes, and words like neural override scrawled in the margins. I whispered, "This isn't real," but the voice in my head said otherwise. The sender's name was blank, the return address a string of numbers and slashes. Dana said, "It's not just a threat, Evan. It's an instruction manual." I could hear her breathing through the line, uneven. A floorboard creaked in my living room, but I lived alone. My phone buzzed again. Another email. Same subject. Moi. Same sender. This time it ended with, "Phase 1 starts tonight." Dana's cruiser pulled up outside my apartment in under 5 minutes. She stepped in without knocking, eyes scanning the shadows. "You lock your door?" she asked. I nodded, though the bolt had been turned halfway when I checked. We sat at the desk, and she leaned close to study the blueprints. Her face tightened. "These aren't science fiction. They're military schematics, just old." The printer in the corner whirred on its own, spitting out a page that hadn't been sent to print. It showed a grainy photo of me, asleep in my own bed, timestamped 30 minutes ago. My throat closed. Dana whispered, "This means someone's in here, or was." The floor felt cold under my bare feet as I backed toward the kitchen, every shadow now suspect. Dana swept the apartment with her flashlight while I stayed near the desk, staring at the photo. The timestamp gnawed at me. It was exactly when I'd been dreaming about someone standing over me. She returned from the bedroom and said, "No signs of entry. Windows are locked." I asked, "What if they never came through the door?" Dana frowned, lifting the printed page to the light. Then, "Evan, they're closer than you think." The lights flickered once, twice before cutting out completely, leaving only the faint glow of my laptop screen in the dark. The blackout stretched into silence, broken only by the hum of the fridge shutting down. My laptop screen dimmed, battery warning flashing red. Dana said, "They might be testing your response time." My chest tightened. Testing for what? She didn't answer. A faint clicking came from the laptop speaker, rhythmic like Morse code. I leaned closer, decoding nonsense letters until one word repeated, "Comply." Dana grabbed my arm. "Step away from it." I backed up, but the word kept flashing until the battery died and the screen went black. Dana slammed the laptop shut and pulled her radio, whispering for backup. Static answered. She muttered, "Figures." I reached for my phone. Dead. "They've cut us off," she said. A faint metallic clink echoed from the hallway outside, like something being set gently on the floor. We froze. Dana drew her sidearm and motioned me toward the bedroom. My knees felt hollow as I stepped backward. Eyes locked on the dark crack under the front door. A shadow passed by, too slow to be human. Dana kept her gun raised while I locked the bedroom door. My heart hammered so hard it drowned out every other sound. She whispered, "We need to get out, now." I said, "The hallway's blocked." She scanned the room, eyes falling on the window. We were on the second floor, but the old fire escape was still bolted to the side of the building. "Grab your shoes," she ordered. I slid them on without socks, hands clumsy from adrenaline. She pulled the curtains back slowly, revealing the rusted metal steps slick with freezing rain. Her breath fogged the glass as she whispered, "We move fast, we stay low." I nodded, but my eyes caught movement below. Someone standing in the street, staring straight up at us, unmoving in the drizzle. The figure didn't flinch, didn't even shift weight. Just stood there, face hidden under a hood. Dana hissed, "Ignore them, keep moving." We slipped onto the fire escape, metal groaning under us. The cold rain cut through my hoodie, making every step slippery. Halfway down, my phone in my pocket buzzed, though it had been dead minutes ago. I pulled it out without thinking. The screen lit up with a single message: "You're leaving too soon." My breath caught. Dana grabbed my arm, forcing me down the last steps. By the time my boots hit the pavement, the street was empty, the hooded figure gone as if erased. Dana led us to her cruiser, parked crooked under the lamplight. We jumped inside, slamming doors in unison. The windshield wipers screeched against the glass as she started the engine. "We're heading to the station," she said, voice tight. I tried calling 911, but the call failed instantly. The radio crackled with static, then a man's voice, calm and deliberate. "Dana Whitlock. You've been warned before." She froze, eyes narrowing. "They know me," she muttered. The voice continued, "Return what you've taken, or we'll take something you can't replace." My stomach turned cold. Dana's knuckles whitened on the wheel as she floored it toward Main Street. We tore through the empty streets, storefronts blurring past. Dana didn't speak, jaw clenched, eyes locked on the road. I finally asked, "What did they mean, return what you've taken?" She said nothing for a long moment, then, "Not now." Her tone made it clear she knew more than she was saying. The rain slowed, but the air felt heavier, thick with a strange static hum. Streetlights began flickering in sync with the sound, one by one shutting off behind us like a rolling blackout. "That's not the power grid," Dana said quietly. My pulse quickened. Something was following us, unseen. Dana swerved into the sheriff's station parking lot, tires spitting water. The building loomed dark, except for one flickering security light. "Stay close," she said, exiting with her gun drawn. The front door was unlocked. Inside, the station was empty. No deputies, no sound except the soft drip of water somewhere. On her desk sat an unmarked package, edges damp from the rain. She approached slowly, eyes scanning for traps. A note was taped to the top in block letters: "Open alone." She looked at me. "This is about you now," she said. My hands felt ice cold. Dana closed the blinds before touching the package. She tore the tape carefully, her shoulders rigid. Inside was a single VHS tape, black plastic worn smooth. "Who even has a VCR?" I muttered. Dana didn't answer. She walked to the evidence locker and pulled one from the bottom shelf. "This was before your time," she said, voice low. We plugged it into the small TV on her desk. Static filled the screen, then an image. Me, bound to a chair. A metal band fixed to my head. The date stamp read 3 days from now. I felt my pulse hammer against my ribs. Dana whispered, "They're not threatening you, Evan. They're scheduling you." The tape cut to black, then flashed a blueprint, same as the email diagrams but more detailed. I leaned closer, reading words I didn't understand. "Synaptic tether. Alpha override." Dana paused the frame. "This is Cold Ridge Tech," she said. "Military experiment, shut down in '97. My throat tightened. "You've seen this before?" Her jaw worked silently before she said, "I saw what it did to people." The screen flickered again, now showing a list of names, most crossed out in red. Mine was the last one uncrossed. Dana yanked the tape out, tossing it onto the desk. "We're not playing their game." She grabbed her keys, motioning me toward the door. "Where are we going?" I asked. "Cold Ridge," she said. My stomach dropped. An abandoned military site 20 miles out. We drove through the rain-slick streets, the town falling away into dark, endless farmland. Lightning flashed in the distance, silhouetting a crumbling fence line. Dana's voice was barely audible over the storm. "If they're back, we need proof before they vanish again." The Cold Ridge gate hung open, chain rusted through. Dana drove in without slowing. The main building loomed ahead, a concrete block swallowed by weeds. Inside, our flashlights revealed peeling paint, smashed control panels, and a thick smell of mildew. "This is where it happened," Dana said. I asked what she meant, but she just shone her light on a rusted metal chair in the center of the room, restraints still bolted to the arms. My skin crawled. "That's where they strap you in," she said flatly. I circled the chair, heart pounding. The restraints were frayed, but stained dark in places. Dana ran her fingers over the bolts. "This isn't old enough to be from '97, she said. "Someone's been here." My flashlight caught a small metal case tucked under the seat. Inside was a headset, identical to the one in the blueprint, polished like it had just been made. A folded note sat beneath it. "Test subject 12, arrives Friday." That was 3 days from now. Dana said, "Bag the headset," and slid it into an evidence pouch while the storm thudded above. A flashlight beam cut the hallway, and a young voice called, "Sheriff." Deputy Ryan Hale stepped in, rain dripping from his cap. He looked barely 30 and already spooked. Ryan said, "Phones are still dead. Station's dark." He glanced at the chair and swallowed hard. Dana asked, "Who else knows we're here?" Ryan said, "No one, far as I know." He lit a cigarette and forgot to inhale. I asked, "You ever hear of Alpha Override?" He flinched like I'd slapped him. Ryan said, "Only that it starts with a tone." Dana's stare sharpened. "Where'd you hear that?" Ryan said, "Old files, Sheriff. Basement box you marked do not open." Dana went quiet, and the room felt smaller. We followed Ryan to a records room buried behind a warped steel door. Shelves leaned like tired soldiers, boxes bleeding labels. Dana pried open a carton stamped Cold Ridge Archive. Inside lay binders and VHS sleeves that smelled like rain and time. She pulled one marked Incident Log, 1997, tutty. A Polaroid slid out. A girl stared back, eyes fogged by flash. Dana whispered, "Tess Morgan." I asked who she was, but she didn't answer. Ryan said, "There's another label." He turned a binder and showed block letters, Whitlock override key. I looked at Dana. She didn't blink. Dana said, "That box should have been burned." My mouth went dry. Someone wanted us to find this. Dana closed the door and braced her palms on the table. "I was military police here," she said. "Clean up after they shut it down." Her voice had splinters. "They called it an override key. It stops a run or makes it permanent." My stomach lurched. I asked, "You took it?" Dana said, "I took one cartridge and hid it under my desk the night the last kid vanished." Ryan said, "You mean Tess?" Dana nodded without looking at him. "They never found her," she said. "And no one looked hard enough." The air felt colder. I said, "So the message on the radio was about that key?" Dana said, "Yeah. And if they want it back, they're working again." The cruiser's cabin light blinked on outside, though no one touched it. Dana said, "Stay here," and moved fast. We reached the lot and found a GPS puck zip-tied under the bumper. Ryan said, "That wasn't there earlier." Dana held her hand out. "Toss me your keys." He fished too long in his pocket. I said, "You drove this last." He shrugged and smiled at the wrong moment. Dana said, "Who are you sending our trail to?" Ryan bristled. "I'm trying to keep you alive." He shifted his weight like he might run. Dana raised her gun and said, "Don't." He lifted both hands, eyes glassy. "They said if I flagged you, they'd let Tess go," he whispered. My chest went hollow. A siren wailed from deep in the building, not police, but something older and meaner. Lights popped alive in the lab hall, one by one, like a throat clearing. A speaker crackled. A calm male voice said, "Return the key, Sheriff." Dana said, "Not tonight." The tone arrived as a thin needle of sound that slid under my skin. My vision shimmered. The headset in the pouch vibrated like a caught insect. Ryan said, "They can hurt him without touching him." Dana grabbed my collar and dragged me toward the exit. "Car, now." The tone bent higher, and the world tilted. I tasted copper. We burst into the rain, and Dana shoved the pouch into my hands. "There's a woman in town," she said. Agnes Morland. She kept the old medical logs. The speaker followed us outside. Phase 1 begins now. I stumbled. We reached Agnes Morland's farmhouse on the edge of town, where the road turns to gravel and the fields swallow sound. Agnes opened the door before we knocked, eyes sharp despite the hour. Agnes said, "You brought the storm with you." Dana holstered her gun and said, "We need your logs." The kitchen smelled like old coffee and wet wool. Agnes set a metal tin on the table and slid out a binder fat with plastic sleeves. She said, "I kept what they asked me to destroy." My name stared up from a yellow form, shaky typewriter letters that didn't belong to me. I said, "That's not possible." Agnes pressed her palm to the page, voice thin. Agnes said, "They came through the clinic. Contractors, not army. Paperwork looked honest, but it wasn't." Dana didn't sit. Dana said, "Show us every page that mentions Cold Ridge." Agnes nodded once, then turned a sleeve that glinted like a blade. Agnes flipped to a stapled consent dated in a month I barely remember. Agnes said, "Your mother signed under duress. They promised migraine treatment." A photo strip showed a boy with a bandage behind his left ear. My stomach fell through the floor. I touched the faint ridge under my hairline and felt heat bloom in my face. Dana said, "The override key isn't software." Agnes nodded, voice slow as a prayer. Agnes said, "It's a phrase mapped to a voice print. The label Whitlock wasn't a cartridge. It was you, Dana." The refrigerator hummed wrong, a high thread that made my teeth ache. Ryan stared at the ceiling, jaw clenched. Ryan said, "They can trigger him from any speaker in town." Agnes closed the binder and set her hand over mine, steady and old. Agnes said, "But what's made can be unmade." The humming thickened into a tone that crawled under the cupboards and into my skull. Agnes snapped off the kitchen light and led us down a narrow stair to a cement-walled basement. Shelves of dusty jars lined a steel table wrapped in wire mesh. Agnes said, "Poor man's Faraday." Dana moved the evidence pouch beside a battered VHS deck, breathing through her nose like a runner. Ryan checked his phone, though we knew it was useless. Ryan said, "They just sent me a live link. Tess is on it." The words scraped. He held the dark screen and looked like a child. Dana said, "You show me, or you walk." He didn't move. Agnes pulled a folded blueprint from a folder and smoothed it with both hands. Agnes said, "You break the tether by forcing a new path. It costs memory." I felt the room tilt like a boat taking water. Agnes powered the old deck and fed in a tape labeled Trial 12. Static swarmed. Then a boy sat under a tin headband, face too familiar. The technician off camera asked him to say his name. The boy said mine. Dana's hand found the table edge and held hard. Dana said, "They scheduled you at 32. The tape jumped to a second slate, stamped activation delay complete. My voice on the audio was older, reading a sentence I didn't remember writing. Evan said, "Blueprints to own the mind." Agnes looked at me with a grief too big for the room. Agnes said, "They taught you to send it to yourself." Ryan wiped his face with the heel of his hand. Ryan said, "They were never coming for the key. They already had him." The tone returned, thinner now, almost sweet, like a nursery song rotting from the inside. Agnes pointed to a line on the blueprint traced in red. Agnes said, "You can burn the tether by overwriting it with the same voice that made it." Dana stared at the headset like it might bite. Dana said, "If I do this, he may lose years." I felt a strange calm rise, like the air before lightning. I said, "Do it." Ryan paced a tight circle, eyes glassy. Ryan said, "They'll kill Tess if we break him free." Dana closed her eyes and steadied her breath. Dana said, "I won't lose both." She leaned toward my ear and spoke a short phrase in a tone I'd never heard from her. The world shuddered, then tore like wet paper, and the dark rushed in. Dana's words cracked the dark, and the world came back like a bad station clearing. Agnes steadied me, as if I were standing on a boat. I said, "What day is it?" Dana said, "Same night, different you." The tone was gone from the room, but a thin echo gnawed the edges of my thoughts. Ryan stood apart, eyes red, guilt chewing him down to bone. Ryan said, "They want to meet at the AIM substation off Miller Road." Agnes said, "They picked it for the antenna field and the ground wire." Dana said, "We take them there, we end it there." I tasted metal and old dust, and felt a missing shape where a memory should live. I said, "If I forget more, promise me you finish this." Dana said, "I already promised Tess that." Agnes wrapped copper mesh around a cooler and called it hope. Agnes tested me with names, and 3 fell through my fingers like wet cards. I remembered the smell of motor oil, not my first apartment. Dana said, "We move before they reset you." Ryan said, "Midnight meet, substation door." Agnes wound the mesh tighter until the cooler sang when she tapped it. Dana said, "Backup isn't coming." I looked at my hands and felt like I had borrowed them from someone braver. The county slid by in lines of wet corn and telephone poles, leaning like drunks. Dana drove with her jaw set and the wipers beating time. Agnes rode shotgun with the cooler at her feet. Ryan stared at the road and at the past, both unfriendly. I felt the old hum under my teeth again and pressed my tongue to the scar. Dana said, "When we get there, nobody improvises." Ryan said, "If Tess is there, I go first." Agnes said, "You go last. You owe truth before bravery." A squat brick box rose from the weeds, with a low white tower behind it. Thence hung open like a mouth. A floodlight snapped on, and the field spoke. A voice said, "Bring the key to the door, and step alone." We passed the water tower and the shuttered feed store like ghosts in a loop. The radio glowed without sound, a red eye that refused to blink. Dana said, "Agnes handles the mesh. Ryan opens doors on my call." Agnes nodded once and slid a screwdriver into her sleeve. A billboard for an injury lawyer loomed and then fell behind like a bad omen. The substation fence hummed with rain, and the sign warned of death in polite fonts. I thought about my mother's signature and felt shame like heat in winter. We moved through grass slick with rain, each step a loud secret. The door opened on its own and breathed out cold air. A folding chair sat center stage with a hood over a head that could be anyone. Ryan lunged, but Dana caught him by the arm. Dana said, "You touch nothing until we see her breathe." The speakers crackled, and a calm man smiled through the wires. Pierce said, "Sheriff Whitlock, your voice ends runs and starts them." Agnes said, "You built a curse and forgot the cost." Pierce said, "Say the phrase and the boy sleeps on schedule." I felt the headset vibrate in the pouch like a heart wanting out. Dana said, "You put the hood on me first." The room answered with a tone so thin it could slice bread. Ryan whispered, "Tess, answer me," and the hood did not move at all. Agnes swept the mesh cooler onto the table and set it humming like a hive. The tone wobbled and the floodlight flickered, but the voice did not flinch. Pierce said, "She is safe in the relay bay. You may see her when the key is returned." Dana said, "You want me to lock him and release her?" Pierce said, "Balance, Sheriff, one life for one lock." I tasted copper and thought of Friday stamped on the note like a dare. The tone narrowed to a needle and found the space behind my eyes. I slid the headset on and felt heat pool at the scar. Dana bent close and spoke the phrase like a code she hated. The world tilted, then steadied on a different street. I saw a boy by a clinic, holding a lollipop and a consent form. He said my name and wore my face. I said, "You are not me." He said, "You will be." I reached through the noise and found a thread of my own voice. I said, "Rewrite on my count, not theirs." Somewhere Ryan cut a strap and said Tess's name like a prayer. Agnes banged metal on metal, and the field hummed out of tune. Lightning bled along the wire fence, and made the air taste like pennies. Dana's hand stayed on my shoulder, an anchor and a warning. Pierce said, "Sheriff, finish the phrase." Dana said, "He finishes himself." The boy frowned and tried on my memories like coats on a rack. He held up the night my father taught me to change a tire, and smiled wrong. I said, "Keep the ghosts. I'll keep the road." The tone faltered, and the clinic peeled away like paint in rain. The hum went ragged, then broke into a dozen sick frequencies. Lightning stitched a seam straight down the tower. The speakers spat static and a human curse. Pierce said, "You will forget everything you love." Dana said, "He is more than your experiment." I said, "I can lose what I am and still end you." Ryan shouted, and Tess answered with a hoarse sob. Alarms blinked red along the wall, and the door locks snapped like teeth. I counted backward and drove my voice through the circuit like a nail. The headset burned, and something lifted from inside me like smoke. The tower lights died, and the field went black. We ran, carrying each other in pieces toward a night that finally felt honest. Pierce's voice tried one last phrase and cracked on the third word. Agnes hauled the cooler by its handle, breath sharp, eyes wet and fierce. Ryan half-carried Tess, a mid-30s Caucasian woman, shaking but alive. Dana stayed at my side and said, "If you forget me, I'll remember you twice." I said, "That's a good trade." The clouds unstitched above the road, and rain became a soft curtain. Sirens wailed in the distance, late as always, but real. We hauled into Agnes' kitchen before dawn, trailing rain and steam like ghosts. Agnes said, "Sit her by the stove." And Tess shook as the heat found her bones. Dana paced with the headset pouch in her fist like a live grenade. Ryan said, "I'm sorry." And no one answered because sorry was a paper umbrella. I rubbed the scar and felt a dead spot where a year should be. Tess said, "They made us speak each other's names until they stuck." Dana unrolled the logs and laid them like charges across the table. Agnes said, "If we publish these, they bury us or they run." Ryan stared at the door and said, "They'll come here first." The radio on the counter warmed to life without being touched. A thin voice said, "Sheriff Whitlock." Dana reached over and unplugged it like swatting a fly. I whispered, "What if there's another phrase?" Agnes said, "Then we speak louder with truth." The stove clicked and the kettle began to sing like it had an opinion. Tess's voice steadied as the tea took hold and the shaking moved into memory. Tess said, "Pierce wasn't alone. He answered to a foundation with a pretty name." Dana said, "Names break, paper holds." Agnes thumbed through the logs and found a ledger that smelled like mildew and lies. Agnes said, "They billed the clinic as a trial for anxiety." Ryan winced and said, "I posted flyers for that study." I pictured the boy on the tape and felt a cold second heartbeat under my tongue. Tess said, "They call the subjects keys because we open doors for them." Dana leaned close and said, "Not anymore." The sirens wandered past the farm like lost dogs and faded. Agnes said, "We need a place they can't scrub in an hour." Dana said, "County Hall has a public bulletin server no one remembers." I said, "Then we remember it for them." Ryan nodded like a man stepping onto thin ice. We split like a small crew planning a heist with truth for the take. Dana said, "Agnes and I post. Evans stays with Tess." I said, "I'm faster if I don't think." Tess smiled without humor and said, "Then run." Ryan offered his cruiser and his badge like a confession. Dana said, "You ride with me and don't touch the radio." Agnes wrapped the headset in mesh and tape until it looked like food you shipped to a war. The town was waking slow, neon open signs yawning into color. I watched from the porch as they pulled away, the gravel remembering their tires. Tess said, "If we live, I want a dog and a bad sofa." I said, "I want to remember where I kept spare keys." The sky brightened like a bruise deciding to heal. The road felt too quiet, which is when you listen harder. We waited with the kettle and a shotgun that smelled like oil and county fairs. County Hall sat on Main like a school that had given up teaching. Dana killed the lights and coasted in behind the recycling bins. Ryan said, I know the admin login from traffic school night. Dana said, you will never say that out loud again. Agnes carried the logs, like a hymn book, and walked with purpose only old nurses have. The server closet smelled like dust and heated plastic. Agnes said, we post raw, we post wide. Dana nodded and said, mirror to every town board in the county. Ryan typed, hands shaking like a leaf that might still hold. The files climbed the screen like ants that had been waiting for the sugar. Alarms didn't sound, which scared me more from 4 blocks away. Agnes said, that's it, and then the building lights hiccup. A voice came over the intercom like a smile you don't trust. Pierce said, Sheriff, your county loves a secret. Dana said, then let it love the last one. By noon the posts bloomed on public boards like weeds in fresh rain. Parents called the clinic, and then called each other, and then called the news. Dana said, no one can unsee it now, and for a second she let herself breathe. Ryan stood outside County Hall, and waited with his hands open for whatever came. Tess watched the threads grow and said, they can't chase all of us. Agnes smiled at nothing and said, sometimes the cure is daylight. I checked my email and stared at a blank inbox, like a quiet lake. A minute later, a new message arrived, with no name attached. It said, schedule updated, and listed Friday again like a dare that didn't learn. Dana said, we'll be there first, and her voice held. I felt the scar cool, and the world returned to its regular wrongness. A delivery van slowed at our mailbox and didn't stop. The kettle clicked off, and the house exhaled. Somewhere a radio warmed its throat.